I chose to do my presentation on the second case, which was Maslow's influence on the Chicago Bulls and the Los Angeles Lakers. For starters, these are two teams that are really relevant. They're known to be one of the biggest brands in basketball. They did not get there just by playing basketball. They were built through structures and different mechanics that were because of certain people. And I'd like to attribute a lot of their success to Phil Jackson, which is who we're going to be going over for much of the presentation. Phil Jackson, he's an NBA coach that coached the Chicago Bulls, that coached the LA Lakers, and beyond that, he was phenomenal. He was able to take these two teams and turn them into dynasty level teams that were able to win big, and do some damage, both in the NBA but beyond, in my opinion. They have players like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant. They were able to make brands. They were able to make names out of themselves. And Phil Jackson is able to take people. It doesn't matter. I mean, he needed leaders to be on the team initially, but he didn't stop at just leaders. He really worked with everyone from every level, and that's what made his teams be so unified. A little bit about Phil Jackson. He has a 70.4 win-loss percentage. That is more than any coach about in the league. It doesn't get much better than that. He's has some milestones that no other coach has ever hit, let alone once, but he's done it twice. On both those teams, he's attributed over 1,000 wins and under 500 losses. The stats really speak for themselves, but beyond that, if you're not looking at the stats, the bigger picture is that you have 11 titles, 5 on the LA Lakers and 6, shout out the Chicago Bulls. They together, he created a dynasty. He created levels of accomplishment that you could not have done, I don't think, if he wasn't in the picture. And again, most coaches don't have the opportunity to do this, which is why I don't think it's the way he coached. It wasn't just the fact that he coached them on basketball. He really taught and nurtured these players from being mindful individuals, and perhaps they weren't initially. And it's a beautiful thing. There's steps that he needs to take, and I think he used Maslow's influence deeply, as he used the steps to achieve self-actualization. So the first one is physiological needs. The second is love and belonging. The second is safety and security. The third is love and belonging. The fourth is self-esteem. And the fifth is where you achieve self-actualization. I want to go through them and how you achieve self-actualization. And that's basically how Phil Jackson, I feel, took advantage and had his own influence by using Maslow's influence congruently. So to achieve, you need to have a few different things. To start, you got to have goals. You got to have belonging. You got to foster a community. You can't just expect a community to be there by itself. I think it's important that you care first and foremost, but it goes beyond just caring. You need to be able to inspire change and self-discovery. I think that's not something that is something easy to do. A lot of people struggle. A lot of people have setbacks. A lot of people don't have someone to talk to that can just tell them to do this, or even have the opportunity to do some of the things that Phil Jackson worked on with his players. I'm sure his coaches. I'm sure with everyone that was in the association that he was a part of. But nevertheless, he had keys to success, which was basically just to keep growing. And when you keep growing, you keep learning. The game changes every day. Life changes every day. Business changes every day. So as long as you're studying, you can be your best self. You're able to keep it moving. You can't, as long as you don't stop, that's how you let that buildup happen. You become less present. You're not able to think in a rational way. And I feel like when you don't have those goals set, you're not as focused initially. And I think that's something pivotal to have in mind. Obviously, goals, sometimes you set a goal and you don't really know how to hit it, but it's important to set those goals initially. And that's one of the pinnacle ways to achieve the self-actualization. Another way is through the connections. Phil Jackson used nurture and appreciation to his benefit. He let his players nurture and grow, and he would also have his own perspective that he'd bring in, such as Um, he'd bring in people such as what was it? He brought in a prison warden and a detective. And I think that spoke a lot, because you're just bringing in random people, but you're really caring about the perspectives of others, which is shifting your players' perspectives that don't have that outlook on life. And I feel like that shapes very much what they'll do going forward, because they see that the picture, a bigger picture beyond just basketball. Um, and I think there's a lot to say on that. The connections that he built is within the team. He built them between him, his player, the leader on the team, MJ, Kobe. He had them nurture the team. By having a leader on the team, you have someone to look up to, not just the coach. Being able to look up to the coach and the player is just as important, in my opinion. But basically, when you're nurturing these connections, you're improving everyone. The leader's improving. Basically, the team's improving. There's nothing really better than that. And I think that was another important outlook to have here, and another way to achieve self-actualization. I'm going to get into one of my favorites, which is the mindful habits. Being mindful has its pros. It doesn't really have many cons, other than it just takes time to be mindful. It's not something that's easy to do. It requires you paying attention. It requires patience. That is not something that people just have. It requires a lot of honesty. And he came at this mindfulness approach with, he'd focus on the whole person in a holistic way, where he wouldn't just care about, he really took the ins and outs. He cared about the body, he cared about the mind, he cared about their spirit, he cared about, taking care of their spirit. He'd bring in a sports psychologist. And I think psychology is super important. It's a big benefit that he went to school and studied and took tips from Maslow that really upped his whole scale of how he did business, how he conducted his team and his livelihood. Bringing in a sports psychologist, I feel that you really they'll hear them out. They'll hear their players out in a way that others can't, and that will attribute to, there's a lot of tension on that court that players don't really know how to let go of, other than playing the game of basketball. So having them foster this a more rational way to go about it is very important, such as Tai Chi and yoga. These are more miscellaneous, but just having a coach that will tell you to do these things, I'm sure, was the major difference maker. Even back in the day, I'm sure going to psychologists or going to psychiatric practice, or just talking about it, wasn't very open, and yet he had his players do that. And I feel like that was a difference maker for these players to get back past these mental blocks, achieving them to be even better players on the court. Require them to be present again, and when you're more present as a player, you could play your best. Every second counts, every minute counts, and when you're not acting or performing your best, that affects not just you, it affects the team. It's a lot of perspective, it's a lot of honesty that you have to have, and I feel like he really created them, these structures, to be able to be used and not just used, but used to their advantage. So back to advantages, the next thing that we could go over is personal growth, the learning and developing aspect of achieving self-actualization, which is super important on top of being mindful, because you need to have the ability, the autonomy. I think that's something a lot of people want, but they don't know what to do with that autonomy, which in reflection will show on their performance. Players can't just be in one spot forever. Some players are trying to be better every day. Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan. These players weren't people that just stopped trying to be better or stopped trying to perfect their game. Even players like Shaq, Derek Fisher, Steve Kerr, different basketball player. But yeah, the whole team was important. I want to talk a little bit about the players. They both had stars on the Bulls and the Lakers. The Bulls had Pippen, Rodman, Steve Kerr again, and even Steve Kerr went on his own to become a great coach, which shows how much They didn't just create good frameworks for them to be players. These players ended up being coaches. Like even on the Lakers, Derek Fisher, he ended up being a coach. You know, I'm sure Kobe coached his daughter. Um, you know, Jordan, I'm sure he gave tips. He gives tips all the time. I mean, he was he owned the Charlotte Hornets, so I'm sure he went into practices all the time. I mean, Paul Gasol, Shaq. I mean, the players just keep going, and all of them foster such a good community for themselves, their families, their lives. I mean, and it didn't just come out of nowhere. A lot of them paid a lot of respect to Phil Jackson for doing that. And back to this, I think it attributes to the personal growth. He'd give them books to read, and not just books to read, but tailored books to read for each of them. He'd build onto their IQ. If for some reason he'd have them do some growth that maybe they wouldn't normally do, like practicing in the dark or practice without saying a word to each other. I think these are interesting ways to build, but it requires you to be present and requires you to think about ways outside of your own, even outside the box. And I think that's how you create and build and achieve self-actualization. And yeah, so getting to the achieving self-actualization, the most important part here is you're finding your purpose and your meaning. I feel like all these people were able to find it because of Phil Jackson. They recognize their flaws, they see their vision, you know, they put their ego aside, they win as a team, they lose as a team. You know, it's not just the one player, it's a whole team, and they're not forcing it. That's the most important part. It's authentic. It's you're building it from the bottom. He's building it from the moment he meets you, and I think that's exactly how you do it. And more or less, yeah, that's about how Phil Jackson shaped these teams to be. Now, personally, I've had a good music experience. I mean, I feel like I achieved self-actualization by going after my dreams, my hobbies, my inspirations from a little kid, and I stuck to them, and I'm finally getting to a point where I could perform and get to show the world my talent that I've been trying to build all this time, and I really appreciate that. And I think the only way to continue building these habits is to keep doing what I'm doing, such as like meditation, working out, working on my body, my mind, taking breaks, doing other arts, other collaborations, working with others, but really just being consistent. And more or less, Maslow's effect on these teams were because Phil Jackson took a lot of his resources and used them for himself in his own ways. You know, and Maslow had 8 steps in his book that Phil Jackson really used and created a whole culture around it, you know? So yeah, I mean, it connects to the consumers through the needs and the wants. You got to look at the ins and the outs. You got to look at what people need. And that's how you figure out what the consumers need and what the consumer may want. You can nurture the market and everyone involved in it. I feel like that's how Phil did it with his teams, and it created a sustainable and efficient organization, not just one, but two. And for a lot of people, they were able to achieve the self-actualization and use, quote unquote, the full use and exploitation of one's talents, capacities, and potentialities. It's all together, and it comes together really nicely, and it's a very interesting perspective all in all, and I appreciate you for listening. Thank you. This is how Maslow had an effect on the Chicago Bulls and the LA Lakers. Thank you.